And when I would try to do that, and I would do it, it would work. But at times she just wasn't ready.
How did
I
she
guess I have
respond?
to,
Well, hold on. I hit record, so let's reset.
okay.
So
Okay.
we're talking about therapeutic cutoff and whether or not clients are even ready for that and how to
Okay. So,
maybe gauge if they are.
okay, we'll start with the question. The question is, how do I get my therapist to, to interrupt me if I'm ranting, if I'm just going on a tangent? Basically,
Right.
that's the question. Okay. So then why don't you answer that concretely and then we'll go to the abstract about readiness.
Oh, concretely.
Yeah.
So my own personal bias would speak to this in saying if I have to tell my therapist that I need to be cut off, I would begin to wonder if I had the right therapist. Like I want a therapist that can like intuitively gauge. Maybe that's what I've done for first and second and third session has been very rant oriented or intellectual, and I would want a therapist within the within the first three sessions for sure to point out that tendency in a way that isn't accusatory or critical, but as an observer stance, and invite me in to reflect on that process of why I might rant, what it might be getting in the way of or protecting me from. So I would need a therapist to just have that kind of innate or trained capacity to wonder about that process in the room with me as their client.
Okay. So if you put on your therapist hat, what would be the process question to get the client to reflect upon the usefulness of the tangential? I don't want to say tangential speech because that sounds like the person might be psychotic, but what is a better word for rant? That doesn't sound so like
Bicker.
accusatory.
Oh, man, I noticed you come in here and
Soliloquy?
bicker, complain,
Speech, complain. Yeah.
tell a woman she's in hysterics. Because I saw that was like in some show I was watching. Like, she's in hysterics. I was like, dear God. Wow. All right.
I need to put on a Kevlar helmet to say that.
I know. It's like, man, that's crazy. But okay. Well, maybe I'm getting ahead of I'm not answering the question either, because I was just saying, well, I wouldn't deal with that therapist. That's not answering the question. Yeah. I mean, I think just being concrete. Hey, I watched like some informational stuff about therapy, and the therapists were talking about a tendency to like go on tangents or to speak very intellectually to defend against their own emotions. And I recognized that I do that in session. I mean, I think that'd be a pretty effective way to go about it. And a pretty easy way to navigate going about it. It's just like, hey, I saw this and it made me think about how I rant and that it gets in the way of my emotions.
Wait, is that you as the client saying that, or you as
Yeah.
the therapist saying that?
As a client. Like if, you know,
Okay.
if I'm going to therapy for a while and I'm on Instagram or TikTok or something, I scroll and a therapist is talking about intellectualizing as a defense against raw emotions, and my therapist never pointed that out to me, it would take some courage, but I think I would try to bring that up in session and talk about it and
Okay.
get their feedback as well. Because maybe I don't do that. Maybe I just saw this thing and wondered if I do.
Okay. All right. Now I'm having like a flood of thoughts because, okay, so this is a problem that I've brought up in my own EMDR consultation, is that I do have clients who intellectualize on, saying ranting nicely, like they intellectualize their experience. But I have come to appreciate that historically I've been the same way too.
For sure.
So for many, many years, I probably didn't even recognize that it's almost like an entrainment with my client in their intellectualization. Like I was joining them in that space. And I'm sure there was some good therapeutic insights developed on the client's part. But I don't think I was making those sessions as experiential as they possibly could have been, because you're right. And I think intellectualization wards off something. Usually it's like an emotion, like a deep well of emotion. So I have come to better appreciate this about myself. So now I can recognize when the client's doing it. But I have to think, okay, so the client is dysregulated, but what is underneath the intellectualization? Are they thinking their way to safety because there's like been an attachment rupture? Or is it like the adage, overthinking is underfeeling? And so they are using that intellectualization, like, again, to ward off the emotional experience. So I, as a therapist, have learned to say, if you were to just press pause on speaking about this topic and instead were to check in with yourself, like what feelings come up for you right now as you even describe what you experienced.
Right, using
And
the immediacy function.
I'm attempting to, but one of two things will happen. Either they continue with the intellectualization, or they'll have an experiential moment, sometimes with tears, and say, yeah, I feel really ashamed, or I feel really angry, or whatever it might be.
Oh, yeah,
So
I love immediacy processing.
when it's yes, in the here and now, like, it can be so helpful to bring the full 360-degree experience back to the client. But then when
It's
they
like breaking
continue,
the fourth wall on a show.
yeah, exactly. But then when the client just continues with the intellectualization, I have to think, oh, well, there goes the ship. The ship just left.
You could say
We're
that.
off. Yeah, we're going again. Yeah. Do you think I could? I don't know how they would react. I guess
Yeah,
it depends
I
upon
mean,
like the therapeutic relationship.
well, I do that where I'd be like, you know what? That moment 5 minutes ago when we talked about the emotion in the room, and there was this experience that we had together. There was like a vulnerable kind of emotion. And in my perspective, shortly thereafter, the pinball started again, and I feel like I'm trying to chase the bunny rabbit around the woods. Like saying it in a more lighthearted, like I'm not attacking or really criticizing, but it's like, hey, I really felt close to you there, and now you're bouncing around all these other places, and I don't know what you're talking about anymore. But I think like implying that through like a pinball machine or a bunny rabbit in the snow, and I'm like following its tracks. But all I really want to do is pet the bunny rabbit. I'm not hunting to kill it.
No, I think those are some relatable metaphors. Yeah.
But that's
Yes.
like a trick against saying, hey, you're being avoidant, or we were talking about this and now you're in a place where I don't know what you're talking about. Like those could be shame evoking kind of process comments.
But I think once you've gotten to our level of experience, there's another unfortunate side effect to intellectualization, is that sometimes the therapist is tracking the client so well in visualizing the story, understanding where the client's coming from, that again, the therapist doesn't recognize that intellectualization is happening. At least that's been my experience. It's like,
Yeah, I don't think
I can,
all
yeah.
intellectualization is bad either. It's a balancing act. Like how I often talk about like the intellectualization being the scaffold by which you can then implore further into the depths of like the emotion. I'm also thinking clients commonly come in showing their strengths. So if they enter the relationship intellectually, that's probably their strength. That's probably a sign that intellectualization is more of a defense strategy, because they're coming forth with that. That's how they enter intimacy, or how they distance from it when it's right in their face, is that intellectualization. And it might be coming off as like a performer, or hey, I understand all this stuff. Or it might be completely subconscious, probably is. But I think clients tend to come into the first couple of sessions showing their strengths. And sometimes that's emotional vulnerability. And sometimes emotional vulnerability is maladaptive. It could be fixation on emotional experience. And it might be adaptive to develop some intellectual properties to safeguard some of those raw emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's this book I haven't read, so I shouldn't even talk about it. But it's called Bad Therapy. And it's, again, I don't know much about it. But what I heard about it is that I'm sounding old now, the new generation, this fixation on emotions and valuing therapy and stuff, but it can unintentionally create a neurosis. Where people
I'm
are
starting
very,
to see that, though, in the younger,
very in tune with their emotions, and they believe that everyone is supposed to validate that, and it creates these deep seeds of rejection, and I think shame and neurotic tendency. Because for me, it's like, I can, not always, but oftentimes I can notice that I feel sad, and there's not like a specific reason. There's nothing that's happened that I would feel sad about. I just feel sad. And even in my early 20s, I would become fixated on that. And I would try to journal and figure out the why and intellectualize as a defense unintentionally. And it created anxiety and tension and like this kind of wiry energy in my body. Nowadays, like if I feel sad and there's not like a specific thing that I need to process, oftentimes I'm just like, well, I guess this is just a wave of this feeling, and I'll probably feel different in 4 hours. Like I just need to kind of allow it to be. And if it doesn't go away, maybe I need to look at it, but I don't need to write like 5 pages about this and then somehow bring up all this stuff from my childhood and then think about that and then talk to people about it. Like it just creates this world of sadness, or this day of fixating on it. And I think that can be an unintentional byproduct of talk therapy.
so
And
then
I found
perhaps-
myself in
yeah.
that cycle in talk therapy, where it's like becoming too fixated on my emotions to where it becomes neurotic. And like my whole day is kind of through that lens when I'm in that 6-month process of therapy.
So then would you say there was some sort of, how was that getting reinforced? Like the therapist was reinforcing you staying stuck?
Yeah, well, I
Friends were
think
reinforcing that?
we could, it could be an unintentional byproduct of staying with the client in those states for extended periods of time.
Okay.
It's like that client I've had before where there's that like learned helplessness and kind of infantile like phenomenology. And I, after a couple sessions, realized that the Rogerian kind of empathy approach did not need to be the forefront of our therapeutic relationship. Like it needed to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. But I kind of sensed that if I continued to just empathize and try to pull her into those like dark emotional spaces, it would be maladaptive. So for her, it was the intellectualization and like getting into a communication with the adult mind of herself was much more therapeutic. Like focusing more on choice and decision making, as opposed to feeling lost and ashamed and hopeless and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because she led with that. That's her strength, focusing on that.
Wait, repeat that again. Focusing on what?
On that learned helplessness,
On the learned
on the
helplessness.
shame,
Okay.
on that hollow feeling, on that like life is meaningless feeling.
So her ability to stand in that and reflect upon it was her strength.
She'd been doing that.
Okay. That's interesting because, like,
Because in relationship, sorry, I'm going to say this real quick and then
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
shut up. In relationship, therapeutic, friendship, romantic, professional, we lead with our strengths. So I think it's, I think it's fair to assume that oftentimes in therapy, subconsciously, we're leading with our strengths.
But that's a really interesting point, and I like how you have phrased that, leading with our strengths, because now I'm getting like flooded with a whole lot of sessions that I've had recently, and I'm thinking about like the client whose strength might be empathizing with others, right? And so now they're fixated
Yep.
on sinning or fixated on hurting people's feelings. But then I'm wondering, okay, so if they're fixated on empathizing with others and being like a quote good person, how does that become? It's like it might be the strength and it might have been the solution to something, but now it's becoming problematic.
It was, and theoretically, I would, again, just with that archetype, think it was their way of feeling loved. And that becomes maladaptive when, over a period of time, self-rejection and believing we're feeling loved become married. So it's like it's similar with like sexual assault. He was like, to feel loved, I have to have sexual dynamic. That's the only way. If I'm a people pleaser, and I probably have learned helplessness too, or common enmeshment with others, there's that underlying theme of self-rejection and a loss of identity, that I must be a chameleon to appease and empathize with others in order to be worthy. That's the only way that I can show my worth. I think it's a trauma response.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But that's the strength. And I say with clients too is, when we realize we've led with our strengths and we're learning new ways of being, whether that's to go more into an emotional depth or to begin to intellectualize certain parts of our story or our identity, it doesn't mean we have to get rid of our strengths. So if I have a toolbox and I have like a flathead screwdriver and I'm on this project and realize I need a Phillips, I don't buy the Phillips and then throw away the flathead. I keep it. It's useful in certain scenarios.
So then what would you say then? Okay, so like if someone develops a better relationship with people pleasing, for example, what would the other side of that look like? Like how do they dial that down?
Well, I don't know. Like think of like, in like a group setting or some, not even group setting. I'm thinking about myself here where I'll observe someone being kind of, they're just kind of maybe talking out of their ass a little bit, and I know that they're wrong about something, but I realize it doesn't matter, right? Like I don't have to be the one to be this kind of like contrarian. And we're in a group setting, like, and then I'll see other people where they have this like need to be like, no, that's incorrect, and they get into this contrarian kind of dynamic. And everyone else in the group is just like, this is kind of weird. Like, this is annoying. Like, who cares? I think that could be looked at as an adaptive way of people pleasing. Where, okay, they're just talking right now. It's not really important that they know that they're wrong. So I'm going to just protect them from that weird interaction and everyone else in this group and just like not say anything.
Okay, so then in that scenario, would you say the person is like just what need is the person putting forth first, or what value? Is that like group harmony? Like,
Yeah, I think like group
just
harmony. I mean, obviously too, if someone's talking out of their ass and I know I'm confident I know more about what they're talking about, and then I display that, I mean, that could arguably be shame evoking. Maybe they're not ready to hear it. Maybe it just really doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, because like
Like-
I love that street metaphor that comes up in the 12 steps so much. It's like, okay, so we're at a party, the person's talking about out their ass about, I don't know, government policy or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just doesn't matter. I mean, it's on their side of the street. The whole point of the party is to celebrate
What's that
Christmas,
saying? It's like,
Valentine's Day.
does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by me?
Yeah. So it's like you're people pleasing yourself in a way, like you're meeting your own need for just peace and harmony so that you can feel safe and connected and stable within your own body rather than create or participate in drama.
Yeah, because there's often times where and I could be wrong about the opinion that I'm right too. But yeah, it's like, do we need to do that? Like, because I get irritated because sometimes when I'm just talking, like there's certain people that feel this need. I don't know if it's like maybe they feel inferior or maybe I just sound like an idiot. That's a possibility. They just keep kind of coming in at this like contrarian style and disagreement. And it makes the dinner unfun. Like, simply put, it just makes the interaction not fun. And it's like, what is the point of this, dude? Like, I don't know. So that's what came to mind just from my own personal shit. But yeah, I like that. And often when I talk with you, I frame things differently because I haven't thought of it that way. But like the leading with strengths, and I often have used the toolbox like metaphor. People become very fearful. Like, I don't want to throw away my flathead. It's done so many great things at my house. I'm like, no one asked you to, bro. I wouldn't throw it away either.
So I think a way to phrase that with a client is, it's not that we're trying to get rid of people pleasing, or we're not trying to get rid of, what's another type of adaptation? Caretaking, or being, trying to avoid being the bother, so to speak. But instead, we want you to have a better relationship so that you know when to pull it out and when to use it and when not to use it.
Even like less the ones that aren't passive, like anger. That's a needed kind of reaction given certain circumstances, and obviously we want to be proportionate to the circumstance. Am I irritated because my Starbucks drink isn't right, or is there a fucking school shooter, right? Like, and anything in between that. Anger is okay in all of those scenarios and needed at some level, but is it proportionate? And is it needed?
Yeah. Is it useful in this moment? Is it relevant to this moment? Yeah, because I think a lot of people do walk around overreacting. I like that. I'm going to have to start framing things that way. So did we stray too far away from the question?
I was about to ask the same thing. I'm like, wait, what was the question?
What rabbit holes did we go down?
The question was, how do I get my therapist to... Yeah, I think I kind of answered that, right?
Yeah.
How would you answer it?
How would I... So if I were the client and I recognize, I intellectualize, how would I get the therapist to break me of that habit or like interrupt me? I think I would have to start with how or why I think it's problematic. If I took notice that I actually did it, and then I'd ask the therapist to help me figure out why I do it, what purpose does it serve, and then that might lead to what's underneath the intellectualization. But then that opens up the door to the question of, is the client ready to put that intellectualization down for a moment and experience what's underneath?
Yeah, and I guess there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, there's only way. Yeah, exactly.
And we don't know the insights the therapist has with that client. They could be allowing the intellectualization purposefully because they believe that the client's not ready to process whatever experience they're intellectualizing. But my bias tells me that often that's not the case. I think that often the therapist isn't recognizing the intellectual process. I'm sure that, obviously there's times where a therapist is going to be like intentional in allowing that intellectualization. But again, I would believe that oftentimes it's on the therapist and recognizing that the process is happening. Because I choose to believe that like clients are more ready to do things than maybe I suspect at times.
And but the whole concept of like intellectualizing for me is now running parallel to another concept. So I think in like previous episodes, we've talked about entrainment, and I was in this EMDR consultant session, and she was asking me to take notice if I'm getting dissociated when the client's getting dissociated.
Yeah.
And so I have this one client, and I put it, over a course of like the last 3 sessions, I've been better able to ask her and reflect upon like what emotional part do you think has not been invited to this conversation, or like which version of you is not being invited to this conversation. And then last session I mentioned something about the getting on with life part. So like if you think of the ego state concept, like in theory, you have it's called the ANP, the apparently normal part. Always cracks me up how they phrase things. And so like this is the getting on with life part, like the part that's like, well, I got bills to pay and taxes are due, and I just got to put my head down and keep moving and earn money. And I don't have the opportunity to confront X, Y, and Z because I've just got to keep moving. And so I recognize that I felt like this part, because it's like you said, she leads, clients lead with strengths. The getting on with life part, she's so good at that. She's had to do that in so many different episodes of her life. That's who was invited to the session, was her getting on with life part. And there wasn't the experiential taking place underneath, because it was like, well, I just got to power through this memory. We're going to reprocess it. So we reprocessed the memory. But it was like, I was not dumbfounded, that's not the right word, but I took notice of, there wasn't like, a cascade of insights that typically develops when people reprocess memories. And so I was confused by that. And so I was like, okay, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to report a SUDS of 0 because, I just got to get on with life. I got to get on with life. And so I mentioned that to her, and she said, and she's like, pause. And I think there's like some crying that took place, and just like, yes, I don't think I've really stopped to think about how this is impacting me emotionally. So I think what I'm trying to say is, when you do confront as a therapist the intellectualization, there is a possibility that the client will then connect that to an emotional experience and then learn how to sit with the unwanted emotion.
What I find
rather
too
than stuff it away
is, because you talked about if you are to acknowledge the intellectualization defense, however we choose to with a process comment, that there's a common experience thereafter where the client continues the intellectualization. In my experience, if I continue to lean back in to that process comment of emotional relationship or connection, anger usually happens. And that's a whole other nugget to begin to process in the here and now.
I think when a client is ready to...
I often had that experience in like the treatment setting, because I had that kind of part of me that was like, okay, we don't have much time, and I need, especially with addiction, my theory was like, okay, if I have a month or 2 months with this client, my main hope is obviously to establish a good relationship, but with trust, but also even if I can create a minor exposure to emotional vulnerability without the use of drugs, it's been successful. So I had this sense of urgency to not follow the pinball for too long. And I think that's where I got a lot of anger transference with clients, which was a whole other like positive thing to like process. So it worked, but that anger became the new defense from the intellectualization, because it was like they'd been found out.
So like once the drug use had to stop, then the next defense was intellectualization. And
Because
then,
we've learned, hey, if I have the emotion, I use to regulate it. It's dangerous.
yeah. And so then when you try to help them come to terms with the intellectualization and feel the feeling underneath, sometimes you said anger would then be transferred to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be like the second layer of defense.
I do remember that. I remember you and I talk about that a lot because of that. I remember that one wacky lady. That's not fair to call her wacky. But the part of me that
There was
empathizes
one
with you.
wacky lady.
I think we're both talking about the same woman.
I remember. Oh, I remember more than one.
The rage. The rage.
And you just be sitting there like, whoa, what is this? What is this defending? It's like giving someone the wrong medication and they're breaking out in hives.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
It was, but it was interesting because I remember thinking so many times when we worked there at that place together, I was like, I just haven't had enough caffeine today to like, it's like 9:30 and we're already raging. It's like, how did we go from, how did we start raging by 9:30 in the morning? Like my brain doesn't even wake up until 10. So I remember that.
Yeah. But I haven't thought, the intellectual, if we stay there, that's the anger. Or in prior
grief.
practice, it's been more of my experience that the client, their second defense, if you acknowledge the intellectualization and try to bring them back, but they're like running around in the woods, is stonewalling.
Oh, okay. So like in the Gottman sense of what stonewalling is, like avoiding to answering the question, or like what do you
like flat, maybe dissociation as well. Just a flat affect and staring and not very communicative. So they stop running around in the woods and instead just opt for a good hiding place.
And so are your clients often aware that they're dissociative, or?
Yeah, I mean, I do my best to pull them out of that and like create reflective moments about that. I mean, if that is to happen, if the second layer of defense is the dissociation, it becomes pretty much the entire session, like pulling them out of that and trying to gain insight into that process and what that kind of emotional removal or even life experience, like conscious self removal, was protecting.
So, yeah, because I think, like, so basically asking, like, I just noticed your face freeze. What emotion do you think came up for you?
Before then.
Just before that, your face and your hand movements just suddenly stopped.
And a lot of times, too, it's like it's once that light switch flips, they're gone. And so for me, it's like I just kind of sit in that space. And my goal before the end of session is obviously like sit there, be present. And then any kind of inkling of them getting out of that space, we kind of like focus in on where they are now. Like, I guess, trying to regulate and like create a sense of groundedness before the end of the session.
Yeah. Make sure they're
Ideally.
safe to drive home.
Right. It's like you don't want to have someone with flat affect staring at the wall and be like, all right, so what's next week looking like?
Exactly.
So it's like
No, that would be terrible. Oh,
it's a hard
no.
hard balance. But yeah, private practice definitely. In thinking about it, I get the second layer is often more of a dissociation than anger.
Yeah, as my consultant says, when clients start to feel anger, that's how you know healing is really taking place because they trust you enough to demonstrate that in session and they have the tolerance within themselves to express it. Although when that lady was screaming at like 9:15, 9:30 in the morning, I don't think that was
I
a
don't think the
therapeutic expression of her anger.
I don't think the people writing books are real close to the inpatient experience. I think
No.
I don't know if it all applies there. It's the wild wild west.
If there are any like young therapists or like people in graduate school listening to this podcast, I highly recommend getting as many jobs and as many levels of care
Yeah.
before going into private practice because it will really help gauge what your client is experiencing and how to best respond to it.
And it's a petri dish for transference. Like as the therapist, but also as in experiencing the client. There's just a lot of like there was way more transference I noticed in like an inpatient setting because they're just so fresh to that process.
Well, it's because your experience was with substance use. What about like the mental health side of things? Did you ever? I've never
Well,
worked in a setting that was exclusively mental health, but
well, then that becomes like medication management and whether or not the medication is stabilized, and there's a whole other. I mean, we were dealing with that in addiction as well, but we weren't having to treat. Well, not often. We weren't having to treat severe mental illness.
yeah,
Like, if someone was talking to the wall, we would ideally refer them to a more specific mental health center.
yeah, okay, yeah. That one was more geared towards the mental health.
But
than
I don't have an experience
substance
like
use.
the only thing I've known to do with delusion is to roll with it and try to analyze it as if it's a dream analysis. Because I don't know what else to do. It's like the medications aren't working or something, right? There's talk therapy can't really take place much if there's psychosis or some kind of severe mental health symptomology.
Yeah,
When we were talking about the like, the APN, what is it? ANP?
oh, the A and P, yeah, the apparently normal part.
So what I was thinking of is a metaphor of a house and the emotional self being in the child's room and the adult self joining with parents. And it's important to be able to do the dishes and to pay our bills and figure out the logistics of childcare and being the taxi driver for kids. But if it's to such a degree that kid is never seen or comforted in that emotion, that's the issue.
Right, because
So it
it's
would be like the
ultimately
parents never entering the kid's room and always just being in the kitchen talking and having adult arguments.
No, that's a really good metaphor because dissociation's on a continuum, and we have primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of dissociation. So if a person is walking around with one ANP, one apparently normal part, the getting on with life part, then they're probably in the primary level of dissociation. So that looks like absorption, like you turn on a really good show and then they're watching that, and someone could ring the doorbell and they may not even notice, or they're driving down the highway and they get sort of like hypnotized by the road. That can be dangerous, but it's not so dysfunctional that it's going to impede the quality of their life. Then when you have secondary dissociation, these can be folks who are walking around with two apparently normal parts. And I don't know that I have experienced clinically a client yet who has shown me two versions of the apparently normal part, but I'm sure, I have to reflect and think. And then with, but so they might have two apparently normal parts and then many emotional selves. And then the tertiary is, again, kind of growing exponentially in number of ANPs and emotional parts.
So that the apparently normal part is masking, or it's camouflaging the dissociation.
Yes, to some
Like
extent.
from the observer. So it's like it's a hidden kind of characteristic of like a shielding from it or something.
Yeah. So like, let's just say, you're an adult, you're in your 40s and you had, it may not even a big that, like outwardly looking or inwardly looking, it might not have been that big of a deal, but let's just say that person had some sort of career setback that was like, they got passed up for a promotion. And that feels very, very shameful, right? So even if that might have taken place like 20 years prior, that part of them that felt that shame and getting passed up for the promotion might be sent away. So it's like it's dissociated from their apparently normal part, right? So like I can't focus on the shame that I experienced 20 years ago because, now it's 2024 and I've got, 3 kids. And like you said, I got to taxi the kids around. But yet it's like kicking the can down the road because that shameful part still travels with them, but it's cast to the side. So if any other situation, like now their child's got rejected from the competitive dance team, so now that evokes a sense of shame in the parent can unknowingly have that emotional part be triggered as well. And now the mom is yelling at the kid in the car, like, why the fuck did you screw up in your competition? In your tryout for the competition team, you should have done this better. You should have done that better. You should have done this better. But it's just like a projection.
Shame radiation.
Yes, exactly. Of something that may have happened like 20 some odd years ago. So that's what, if we walk around with dissociated emotional parts without recognizing them, then we are going to be in a constant, not necessarily constant, that might be hyperbolic, but we're going to be in a state of vulnerable to trigger. We're going to be vulnerable to other situations triggering shit from our past. And then we're just walking around reacting to it.
And inviting in relationship dynamics with people that also communicate in that form.
Yes, that's another layer to the onion. Yes, it does make you vulnerable to people who also within themselves maybe cast away shameful parts, emotional parts that experience shame.
Yeah, because in a therapy lens, we're seeing it as like a shame radiation. However, in a layman's experience of the shame radiation, it's just abuse.
Yeah.
Like that's the byproduct of that, right? Is okay, you might have your shame and your experience 20 years ago of being looked over for a promotion, but I'm 6 and I just got cut from the dance team and I'm upset and you're yelling at me and telling me I didn't do something right or that it's all my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think, until somebody is willing to go there and really deal with the negative core beliefs that might have developed when getting cut from when not getting the promotion 20 years ago, then they're going to walk around with this negative core belief of I'm not good enough, for example. And then you're right. Like the second layer to that is who does that invite into your life? So if you are walking around with a negative core belief of I'm not good enough, that leaves you vulnerable to attracting people who could benefit potentially from being partner with somebody who doesn't believe they're good enough.
And the inverse of that, socially, primarily connecting with others that have the same belief. So it creates like a group echo of helplessness.
Oh, yeah. I guess, yeah, that's a possibility too. I could see that.
And so it's a double helpless interaction, because the people you connect with believe that they're not enough, and then the people that you have romantic relationship with possibly weaponize and gain something from you believing that.
That kind of harkens back to what you said earlier about, I'm going to use the word echo chamber, but it's like that neuroticism. So then if all your girlfriends don't believe that they feel good enough, then does that just create this web of reinforcement?
Well, who's your model?
Yeah.
Like, who's your strong person? Who's there to refute that claim?
Mm-hmm. But this is also very interesting because I was listening to this podcast, and the guest of the podcast was talking about, what did she call it? It was like stupid support or stupid validation. And it's when you see this is like you have like a group of friends, and I'm going to be sexist here, but like one woman is like, my husband is a fucking asshole and he doesn't do the dishes and he doesn't do X and he doesn't do Y. And then she surrounds herself with girlfriends who do that stupid validation. Like, oh yeah, he is a dick. He didn't, you should be angry about that. Rather than a truthful friend who's like, okay, but what are you not doing in the relationship? I'm sure he's got a whole list of complaints about you.
Yeah.
And so
because
it's interesting how, yeah.
Because that friend that's offering the stupid, whatever the
stupid validation, yeah.
Stupid support, they're supportive for a selfish reason, because that's how they believe they're going to feel worthy in the relationship with their friend. So it's also suggesting that their low self-esteem is a contributor, because that's the people pleasing, that's the agreeableness. But also the self-centered nature of, if I am to wonder your part in this relationship dysfunction, I might have to wonder about my part in my own. But if I can echo the victimization, you like me, we're close, we're girls, we're guys, whatever. But also, I can remain a victim. I don't have to take any responsibility for the chaos in my own life.
Maybe is this why we don't get invited to dinner parties, Evan?
Yeah, the other day I was just like staring off, and I was with someone, I'm like, we watch most of our dogs die until we die before our last one.
Like, you said that? Or
that's what I was thinking. I said it out loud. Like, what the fuck, dude? This is like what I was thinking.
Day.
I was like, I don't know. I just think that's kind of odd,
That's so funny and sad at the same time.
Yeah, it's like, I just go into these reflective realms of the temporary aspect of life and the fragility of it. Mm-hmm. And it's good, but it could also not be good, right? Like, that could be an adaptive quality, could help me, like, take risk and live and enjoy. But it can also cause me to fall into this existential crisis hole where I feel sad and upset all the time. So it's like gonna balance that.
What was the person's reaction to you saying that out loud?
Well, I was like, I say shit and then try to recover later. So I just said it, and then, because I was probably thinking about this for a minute or two in silence. But I also try to say what I'm thinking, because I'm a deep thinker, so if I don't say anything, someone could assume it's like a thing about them.
Oh,
So I have to
yeah.
like say the crazy things that usually aren't about someone else. Actually, I got a good response. It was like, yeah, Evan, that's why I love you. You have these really wild, yet thoughtful things that you say randomly. So it was a positive. But I mean, initially it was like, that's a pretty odd thing to be thinking right now.
If you had said that to me, I just would have died laughing. 'Cause I totally get it. Yeah.
I want
That's
to
why.
talk a little about, yeah, I guess existential stuff, like the idea of death. And culturally, it's this avoided idea.
Mm-hmm.
And my opinion is like that isn't helpful. And it's scary to talk about and to like envision. Like I see this often with, yeah, people, but like pets as well. It's like this hesitation to acknowledge that the pet probably is not going to outlive you.
Mm-hmm.
Like it might, but probably not. And being able to like acknowledge that and talk about it, especially, if there's issues coming up. I mean, you see this often with like, adults in their 50s or 60s, and maybe like someone elderly in their life is showing signs of decline. It's like, right, we want to be supportive, we want to be there, we want to help how we can, but also this isn't some like end game where we're going to create a life that doesn't end.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It just becomes this kind of weird thing where it's like, wait, what is everyone so energized about? Like, is the goal to just create an immunity to death? Like, these people die and we will die. There's no way to escape that. So we need to like talk about that and acknowledge it and be a part of that process as opposed to avoiding it.
I think we could get a lot of referrals from veterinarians if we've marketed ourselves to them. Because
Yeah.
one of my girlfriends left one of the contributing factors to her for her decision to press pause on her career in the veterinary industry was precisely this consistent and constant interaction with clients who wanted her to do everything to quote save the elderly dog or save the elderly cat, because they conceive of these pets as their quote children. And yeah, it's like obviously there's like something more going on internally with the client than with the veterinary client than meets the eye. But you're right. I think a lot of people want their animals to be saved and to live because you're right. It delays them having to really think about their own mortality.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think the selfish element of this is if I'm to deny your mortality, I can also deny my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this selfish motivation to prolong a parent's life or animal's life or anyone's that's obviously declining and deteriorating, because I don't have to then think about death.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about life and how to continue it. And I don't have to become, existential in the way I'm reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fear response too. I mean, I saw this a lot. Because my dad was a florist, so especially in the South. I mean, not so much now, but still, but 10, 20 years ago, flowers were a huge part of funerals.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a young kid, I would be there, and you'd see families coming and all that. And it's like I would be very exposed to just like the complexity of death and the different ways that people respond to it. And like some people might have, obviously if it's traumatic and stuff, I'm talking about like in this context, like elderly people and like the people that are still alive coming and like ordering flowers and stuff. You could really
So
gauge.
situations with like anticipatory grief.
Right. You
Like,
could
you know,
gauge
grandma's getting
the
sick
people's
and
like
yeah.
relationship with death based on how they interacted with us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The person's 90. It's not a shocking kind of situation. You could
Right.
gauge someone's own capacity to reflect on their own mortality based on how they interacted at the flower shop.
So were you noticing people not able to really come to terms with the fact that grandma's 90 and had died? Like it was just such a shock to them,
Well, an
and
easy
they'd
way
never
to,
paused to think about what life would be like without her.
yeah, and I think often the transference at a flower shop is being overly critical of the flowers.
Oh.
So it creates this reverberation of attempting to control and being angry that there's the wrong violet, right? It's this fixation on the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that anger and intolerance and frustration is like a defense to the grief. And again, if it's not an anticipatory death, it's like, and they've lived a long life, it's like, it seems more of a reflection on their own sense of like mortality and ability to conceptualize that than the event itself.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, sometimes it would feel like being a therapist at a treatment center and they just walked in from like a run, you know? It's like, holy shit, this person is wild.
It was like radiating all of
And they're
this
like raging and
rage.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just can't even fathom some people like,
Your poor dad.
yeah. Or like how it might transfer into reviews afterwards. Like similar to a treatment center.
Yeah, but suddenly I had this like emotional flashback as you were talking about your experience in a flower shop. It was this brief time when I was in graduate school. I helped run like children's birthday parties for this one company. And I remember this mother just like losing her shit on me. I don't even know what the sin was or what expectation wasn't met. But I was just like, it was interesting. I was like coming to terms with my own enmeshment with my own mother at the time. And I just remember standing there, like at first, like feeling that tidal wave, like, you know, what's coming at me. And then I just remember, like, I'm not going to give this woman the satisfaction. Then there's like this rebellious side that popped up. And I was like, I'm not going to give this woman the satisfaction of thinking that she can intimidate me or that she's like got me, you know, to, you know, make amends or make whatever. I don't know what she was seeking. She was seeking something like maybe it was like a partial refund or extra this, extra that. I can't even remember. But I just stood so steadfast in my position that that I had done everything according to plan. And she was the one having the emotional reaction, that it was interesting watching her rage at me and then realizing she's not getting any kind of reaction. And then she decides, okay, well, maybe I got to meet this woman at a more regulated, possibly intellectual space. It was interesting to see this like rise and fall of emotion.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you
that was
held the
my
mirror
own
up.
issue, but I tried. Yeah.
That's also an example of keeping the Phillips or keeping the flathead screwdriver. So at times in life, rebellion could be a maladaptive defense strategy that could create like a labeling effect on you or evoke like dynamics where you feel shameful. However, you could work on that, but in that situation, the rebellion provided a better kind of adult dialogue.
Oh, thank you for saying that, because yes, exactly. Because if that people pleasing part had been stronger and hadn't linked up yet with rebellion, I would have been like, oh yeah, you're right, you know, and
Start
then run around like a
apologizing
chicken with
for
my
your
head cut
presence.
off. Yes.
Yep.
Apologizing for my presence, apologizing for all the mistakes I've ever made. Yes. And trying to like, you know, offer up stuff
It's
to
like a
be
rebel.
as
It's like
concessions.
her shame radiation came out, and you're like, "Fuck that! Get out of here!"
I had the sunscreen on. I'm like, I ain't
You're
gonna.
like,
I'm
"No,
not absorbing it
the fuck out
today.
of here!" Yeah. Exactly. She's like, you're gonna take your hazmat suit off. And you're like, fuck you, no, I'm not.
Exactly.
Like, we
But
can
for
rebel
you
if
as-
you're asking
yeah.
us to take off the suit that's protecting us from the radiation. That's good rebellion.
But for you as a kid, that just must have been an interesting microcosm and watching people experiencing emotions.
Yeah, I think it was another pathway in my life that offered that observer perspective. Because also, I mean, I'm not working either. I'm just like there watching. They're not asking me about the flowers. I'm just literally 10 feet away listening and watching.
Well, I have to say, I don't think I'm raising people pleasers, so that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, he doesn't want to do any chores now that he's 18.
It was funny because my eldest, he now works in fast food, and he's like, I hate this job. I guess because it was this moment in time where, of course, it's fast food. They're always going to be understaffed, right? And he perceives he's doing the job of 4 people. So he's running around like a chicken with his head cut off. And he had to meet a woman outside to hand her food because it wasn't ready, at the window. Yeah. And so I guess she allegedly said something kind in the sense of, like, I understand y'all are short staff, but she turned to my son. She goes, but you need to work on your customer service skills, and I'm going to pray for you. She said, I was like, how Southern is that? And my son was like, according to him, he said, that's very kind of you. Thank you for praying for me. But
oh my God.
I got
That's like
too
such
much
a
to
Southern
do.
thing where it's like,
I know, isn't it?
it's like, wait, are you being genuine right now, or is this like a bless your heart situation?
I know, exactly.
I can't tell. There's a lot going on here. Did you just tell me to go fuck myself?
Exactly.
Or that Jesus loves me? I'm not sure. Maybe both? Go fuck yourself. Jesus still loves you. See you later.
Exactly.
That's funny. Well, I think we answered it, hopefully.